In this video, we're going to introduce the basics of Greek verbs. We're not going to look at any actual Greek verbs, but we're going to talk about the idea of the verb and how verbs function in Greek. So the first and most important thing to know is that Greek is a highly inflected language. This is true when it comes to verbs and also when it comes to nouns. So Greek can change the word, it can change a verb, the way a verb looks to indicate different information. It inflects or changes its form to get in a variety of different kinds of information. Whereas in English, which is a lowly inflected language, we add extra words for that same information. So when it comes to Greek verbs, Greek will change a single verb for its person and its number. That is, who is doing the action and the number of people that are doing the action. So one single verb will look a little bit different, but it will still be one word rather than multiple different words in English. So to indicate who does the action in English, we add a pronoun. I, we, you, y'all, he, she, it, or they, whereas Greek smushes that into a single word. So when we're talking about person, we're talking about who does the action. And so there are three persons in Greek. The first person, I or we. So I in the singular, we in the plural, which is reference to number, how many people do the action. So first person singular is I in English. First person plural is we in English. Second person singular is you in English, or y'all if we want to be Southern. And of course, also you or you all can be plural, second person plural in English as well. And then when it comes to the third person, he, she, it, and they are all singulars in the third person. And third person plural is also they. So not only does Greek change its forms with respect to person and number, but it changes its forms of verbs to indicate tense. That is, when or how the action happens. So tense is largely related to time in the Greek language, and there are several different tenses. The good news is the last two of these are very uncommon in the Greek New Testament, and the third to last one, the perfect, is common enough that we will in fact learn it, but is not as common as the first four. So there are four very common tenses in Greek. The present, that is action happening in present time. The future, that is action happening in future time. Dr. Elder will teach for the future. Dr. Elder is teaching, or Dr. Elder teaches for the present. Imperfect and aorist are past tense. So both are happening in past time. Imperfect is what is called ongoing action in past time. Dr. Elder was teaching. The action was happening over a course of time, whereas the aorist is simple action in past time. Dr. Elder taught. The action is viewed as a whole rather than as ongoing. And the perfect is action that was completed in the past, but continues into the present. So in English, we would probably do this as Dr. Elder has taught. Dr. Elder has taught me Greek. He taught me Greek in the past, but I still know the Greek that he taught me. Greek will also change its form of the verb for voice, and that is how the action relates to the subject of the sentence. The subject is the central figure with respect to the verb, but how the verb relates to the subject differs based on voice. And again, the voice of a verb is indicated in the verb itself rather than with words appended to it. So with the active voice in Greek, the subject is doing the action. Dr. Elder teaches. Dr. Elder is the one doing the teaching. The middle voice is a bit unfamiliar to us in English because we don't use it often. We use it with what is called a reflexive pronoun. Dr. Elder teaches himself, or the students teach themselves. The action of coming back and doing something for one's own benefit, or acting upon oneself, is what's going on in the middle voice. And what we'll find is it's actually a little bit more complicated when it gets down to it later on. And then the passive voice is when the subject is acted upon. Dr. Elder was taught Greek. Someone else was doing the teaching. Dr. Elder was taught Greek by Dr. Kim, or the student was taught Greek by Dr. Elder. The subject of the sentence, Dr. Elder or the student, is not actually doing the action. The action is being done to the subject of the sentence. And lastly, here, Greek verbs have mood, and this is how the action is viewed. And mood is sort of a larger category than is any of the others. So what we'll see is that with respect to different moods, there are larger changes. We're moving into different categories with the different moods. And again, mood has to do with how the action is viewed. In the indicative mood, which is the basic mood of Greek, the action is viewed as real, as it has happened in the past, it is happening in the present, or it will happen in the future. It's real action that is known to happen. So Dr. Elder taught, it did really happen. Dr. Elder is teaching, he is really doing it, or Dr. Elder will teach, he will really do it in the future. Whereas the imperative mood is a command. Teach us, Dr. Elder. So the action may or may not happen depending on whether or not the one who is commanded does the action that is commanded to them. So the imperative mood is the mood of command. The subjunctive mood is the mood of possibility. The action may or may not happen. Dr. Elder should teach us. So in English, we often indicate the subjunctive with that word should. It may or may not happen, but it is a thing that should happen. Or Dr. Elder might teach us. Another way to indicate the subjunctive in English is with the word might. It may or may not happen. It's possible, but it is not real action. It is not known whether it will actually happen. And the infinitive is the pure idea of the verb. That is, it's not limited by anything. It's not limited by who does it. So to teach, in English, to indicate the infinitive, we do to verb to indicate that the verb is not limited by who is doing it. To teach is a good thing. So with respect to the parts of a Greek verb, what we get is that Greeks have different parts to them, and these are the parts that inflect or change, because Greek is that's right, a highly inflected language. These different parts are going to change to indicate different things about the verb. So there are essentially sort of four main parts to a verb. First is a prefix. That is something that is added to the front of the verb, and we'll talk about what there's a variety of different prefixes that is added to the front of the verb's stem. So the stem is the sort of basic part of the verb that is then followed by a connecting vowel, usually epsilon or omicron. These are the two most common connecting vowels, and then an ending added on. And so it is really in the ending and in the prefix where information about the verb is embedded. So this is the way that the verb is inflected to change. So person and number especially are going to be contained in the ending. So to indicate that that we are doing the thing, the ending men is going to indicate that we. It's going to indicate the first person plural in one single verbal system, what is called the present active indicative. So we loosen is conveyed by the single word luamen. So this means we loosen in English, because English is not a highly inflected language. We have to add in the extra pronoun we to indicate the information that is already embedded in the men there. And so Greek verbs will usually or very often not have a pronoun before them. You won't get an I, a you, he, she, and it, a they, a y'all before the verb itself. And that's not a hard and fast rule, as we'll see. Sometimes you do. But Greek doesn't necessarily need the pronoun to indicate who is doing the action, because it can embed that information by inflecting the verb. It can embed that information in the verb itself.